Welcome everyone. We'll be starting in just a second. We're going to let the crowd gather here. All right, I have 202 now, or 201. Why don't we, Jared, why don't you get us started? We will roll from here.
All right, wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Jared Schneider. I'm the Senior Director and Bus Initiative Lead for the National Nonprofit CALSTART. Just a quick background on who CALSTART is. So you guys know who's speaking to you here. CALSTART, we've been around for 30 years. We are a national nonprofit. Like I said, we are technical consultants. We come alongside trans agencies, DOTs, work with the bus OEMs, with the FTA to really help expedite the transition to zero emission vehicles. Joining me today is Mike Hines, our National Transit Program Manager, and also Maureen Marshall, our Senior Director and Midwest Regional Office Manager. Sorry, Maureen, I never know how to wrap up the end of your title.
I never do either.
Good. So, Scott, you want to go ahead and go through the agenda?
Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Scott. I'm the Executive Director here at CTAA. I think I know most of you. Thank you for taking some time to join us. We think we got some really good content here for our members, and we've been engaged with CALSTART for the better part of the last 2 to 3 months to kind of work this up, and we're excited about it. You know, the issue here, small transit agencies making a successful transition towards zero emission, is one that CTA members have seen as a challenge, and they've kind of seen that as a challenge around, I think. I've heard from a lot of members a lot about, like, why do I need to do this? And then ideally getting to the, okay, how do I do this? And there's a lot of reasons why. And these are not just political reasons why. The private sector is moving in this space. Yesterday, I was in New Jersey sitting with one of our members who relayed to me that couldn't get a cutaway bus, found a readily available group of Ford E-Transits, moved into this space, is having a good experience. Also said saved money on their purchase against what they would have paid for a cutaway, what they got the E-Transits for. There's a lot of reasons right now why we need to do this, and you know, we're just excited. This series of webinars has you know, is really front to back, start to finish. We're doing a lot of stuff today on overview and on the planning, but stick with this, and you're going to get an inside look at the infrastructure. You're going to get an inside look at how to align your policies with local and state policies. We're going to have some case studies. There's a whole series of these 7 webinars that should allow you at the end of this to feel much more comfortable with where your agency is and how to get where you want to go. And we feel, having talked to Jared and Maureen and Mike quite a bit, we feel this is the team to help CTA members get there. So you can see we've got a 1-hour agenda here, and we probably do not need to do anything more with the intros, and let's get into the content.
Wonderful. Thanks, Scott. And if for some reason my internet starts to lag behind, I'm sorry. And it looks it's a bit unstable, but I'll do my best here. So as Scott said, we've been working on this for a while. And actually, Scott, you and I started talking about this, I believe, about 1.5 years ago, and trying to lay out something along these lines. So this has been a long time in the coming or in the making. So really excited. Like Scott had said, we are looking at these to talk about fleet transition plans. Really, this is educational, giving you a really good idea of what goes into a fleet transition plan, how they're developed, and why each of the, and my lights just went off, but sorry, why each of the sections of the transition plan are so important. Also, keep this in mind, these are living documents, so the fleet transition plans are not binding. This gives you a roadmap and a better idea of how to move through your fleet transition. Also, we're utilizing our funding to pay for this, for these trainings and for this series under the Transit Vehicle Deployment and Innovation Centers, TVIDC, which is through the FTA funding. We bring that up simply because this is a fantastic program that the FTA has funded for a number of years now. Please make sure, like, if you may hear us talk about TVIDC in the future, this is something that we would love to continue having reauthorized so that we can provide more of this content, so we can develop more tools, and we can talk more about that in a different time. But just know that that's where the funding is coming from, is through the FTA. We do have this 7-part series, and each of these parts is going to be broken out, looking at an element of the transition plan. And then to supplement that, each Tuesday, so this next Tuesday coming up, there is a podcast episode, which is self, Mike, and Maureen really doing more. It's not scripted at all, us just kind of talking through each of the elements kind of that we're going on it. So it's more of an in-depth, informal kind of conversation, so a passive way to absorb the information. But that can be found, it's the Transition to Zero podcast. You can find on Apple, Spotify, or go to the website, which is transitpodcast.org. Next slide, Maureen. And I think this goes over to Mike now.
Yeah, thanks, Jared, and welcome everyone. So, I mean, as we get through this, we really want to start off at the basics. Why are we doing this? What is the purpose for it? And how these fleet transition plans really will support your agency. So if we think of why we're going to zero emission, it can be a host of reasons, and that can be very localized, can be very regional, it can be very much based on what your agency needs. But from a high level, we're really looking at it from, number one, improved air quality. I think transit agencies, one of the things that agencies do so well is leave their neighborhoods better than they found them. Agencies work every day to support their communities, get people where they need to go, make sure they're doing it safely. And one of the ways that they can do that when moving to zero emission is that improved air quality. We all know that diesels in particular have a negative impact on the air quality in our community. That negative impact can be really localized to income levels, lower income communities, minority communities, rural communities in particular. So one of the great things that zero emission does is improves that air quality. For agencies, there's fuel and maintenance savings. The lifetime savings in fuel and maintenance costs, those are real savings that are passed on to the agency. As we go through this process, as we go through these webinars, you're going to see what those costs entail, what the entry costs are. But over time, by and large, agencies realize savings in fuel and maintenance. And that's vitally important, as you all well know, where budgets are tight, whereas a smaller agency in particular, you're having to make difficult choices on how you're spending the dollars that you have. So getting that savings in fuel and maintenance is really key. And again, part of what you're going to achieve by moving to zero emissions. And then sustainability, like I mentioned, leaving our neighborhoods better than when we found them. Each ZEB can reduce harmful emissions by 270,000 pounds per year. If you think of a full-size bus, that's a dramatic reduction in harmful emissions that are in our communities. Electricity and hydrogen are also domestically sourced. You're getting energy from your local communities, and that can be energy from a variety of sources, be it hydrogen that's produced in your community, wind, solar, electricity from hydropower, you name it. Those energy sources are within your communities, and they're directly supporting your transit agency and the people who ride your systems. Next slide, please. So when we talk zero emission, there's really kind of two types that we're looking at. We have battery electric and we have fuel cell. So if you think of battery electric, the battery is stored on the rear of the vehicle and the energy stored within that battery is used to power the bus. Battery electric is capable of using kinetic energy through regenerative braking, to help restore some of the power in that vehicle. So we'll talk through that in later webinars, how your operators play a direct role in the efficiency of these vehicles and how they can play an important role in how you make your decisions on going to these vehicles. Charging can be completed in multiple ways. You have en route, you have depot charging at your garage. You can have a combination. Again, as we go through this process, you're going to see that there is no one way to do this. Really, these fleet transition plans are designed with what your particular needs are for your agency and what will work best for you. And those solutions can be very unique to your agency. So that's one of the great things about going through this process is you're not being given a solution that only works for someone. You're given solutions that will work for you and that will make you effective. And again, BEVs do not emit harmful tailpipe emissions, caustic greenhouse gases, again, cleaner air, cleaner neighborhoods, cleaner services. Next slide, please. And then we have fuel cell. Fuel cell stores energy on board, which powers the bus, often compared to CNG. That's probably the most apt comparison. Fueling storage systems and fueling processes are very similar. So it can be attractive to agencies if you're already using CNG because you're familiar with that process. Fueling can be completed at your depot or other location based on what your needs are. Typically produced via electrolysis, steam methane reforming, often called SMR, or delivered hydrogen. Again, as we work through the fleet transition process, that's a decision that can be made, and really you can dive into that deeper to figure out how that process, if hydrogen works for you, how that process can be made amenable to your specific needs. And again, FCEVs do not emit harmful tailpipe emissions. So again, a cleaner option, cleaner environment, cleaner service area for your customers. Next slide, please.
Just 1 second. There we go.
And with that, I'll pass it over to Maureen.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And so just to give you a little bit of overview about CalSTART's fleet transition planning. Over the last couple of years, we have supported well over 65 fleet transition plans, primarily around transit, with the development of, really working in partnership with the transits, with the fleets to build out these plans. Like Mike mentioned, they're very personalized. So really having that connection is important. We've also supported utilities around their fleet transition planning services that many utilities are coming out with, which kind of enable and support like the build out of incentives and rebates, and then also helping them also provide the localized resources and tools needed. In addition, we've also supported both the regional, national, and even local level fleets on their fleet transition planning processes. So you look at the picture there to the right, we've been busy, and it's been a really exciting experience getting to know each fleet personally and sitting down with them, understanding what their needs are, what their questions are, and where they're coming into the process at. So when you look at our fleet transition planning, we really have tried to break this down into 3 separate categories of offerings. Level 1 is basic offerings, kind of similar to what you would see in the FTA Lono requirement that comes out each year. Level 2 adds a little bit more structure in it, really kind of giving you some more additional guidance as far as utility rate structure. What could that utility cost look like on an annual basis, both on peak, off peak, summer and winter months? We really dial in on a more cohesive charging strategy. What works for your current operations? And then also we provide a little bit more detail when it comes to greenhouse gas emission reductions. And these are key components that you will need to go in front of any of your stakeholders that are the decision makers when you are looking to go forward with this purchase in purchasing vehicles. And our level 3, we call it the full gamut. That would include everything from strategic technical guidance, a really in-depth overview of the total cost of ownership, including infrastructure. We also provide roadmap detail about what that fleet electrification transition could look like. If it's a 3-year transition, 5-year transition, these are some of the examples I'll go through today. And in all honesty too, one of the big things is that you really don't want to be thumbing through a report when people are asking you questions and you need that high level detail. And so we have developed this 1-page overview guidance tool that provides you that one step, one look resource. So when you're sitting in a meeting or you have it at your desk available to you, that's part of a level 3 transition plan as well. And there's other offerings that we can make that are tailored to your needs too. But again, that happens when we first sit down and decide what next steps look like and what the deliverable looks like. This is a quick overview of what we call our 3-phase process. So we have the investigational phase, where we're really sitting down for the first time with the fleet, understanding what their fleet is made up of, what their fleet replacement plan looks like, what is their current annual cost for fuel maintenance. And then we really take the data that's gathered during this point and go through the development process. This is where we actually take that data, we do a technology analysis on the products that are currently on the road today, vehicle-wise, work together to decide what are good replacement products or vehicles for that same use case. We look at emissions calculations, we do an infrastructure assessment, what type of energy and profile load energy requirements are you going to need on a weekly, even daily, weekly, yearly, annually basis. We then kind of come through and do an infrastructure planning again around your current depot's operation or operations in general. What works for you? Do you have break times, lunch times? What does the dwell time look like for your operations? We dial in on what that charging strategy looks like. So are you going to charge during off-peak, on-peak? What makes sense? With the focus of lowering costs as fast as possible. And throughout this process too, we're providing the guidance and education for questions that come up through it. I mentioned the total cost of ownership, really looking at what is this total cost to transition from my current ICE fleet to a zero-emission fleet. And then we do a funding review of what funding review opportunities are available across your state, your local, state, utility, and even federal funding opportunities. And we align that into the timing as well. Phase 3 is when we take all these components, kind of lay it out based on, is this going to be a 3-year transition plan, a 5-year, or even longer? It's much easier to see, over the next 5 years. So a lot of times we do try to work towards that 5-year goal, because after 5 years, the environment has changed so greatly, and we don't have that insight yet as to what funding opportunities will be available, and even what vehicles will be available at that time as the industry grows. And last but not least, is really giving you the final report and the knowledge products that you need. As I mentioned, that 1-page handout, followed by the customer fleet report, or if there's a need for this, we'll develop a case study that can be shared with outside stakeholders. And sometimes we remove all of the personal identification information so that, people understand that a fleet of this type as opposed to your direct fleet. I'm going to walk you through in the next several slides kind of what that step process looks like and what type of things that we ask for and are seeking. So in step 1, this is really, we start that open dialogue and we work with the fleets one-on-one to understand what their fleet looks like. And it starts with what we call the fleet intake form. And so on this intake form, we really gather all of the data on your current fleet, from the vehicle number, the fleet number, manufacturer, model, the vehicle class, the current model year, current fuel type, your annual fuel costs, maintenance costs, where's it domiciled, because you might have 2 depots, so that might play a role in the charging strategy. And then the use case, again, that plays the role on what's the best fit of vehicle replacement for that. And then it's the vehicle right size. That's another piece. A lot of fleets are looking to either right size their vehicles if they are over capacity and they need to actually go from like a 25-foot to a 40-foot, or even from a 40-foot to a 35 or 25-foot vehicle. But this first piece of data really provides all the guidance we need to get a fleet transition plan in place. Building a little bit onto the duty cycle assessment, we really need to understand your operations on a daily basis across each vehicle, because as you know, many fleets run on demand, paratransit, and fixed route. And the daily operations vary by vehicle. Some of those vehicles might run 7 days a week, others might only run 5 days a week, and then some might only support early morning and late night requirements. In the second step, we take, using all this data, we determine what electric vehicle options are available to you in the market, and we do so using one of the tools that we have developed called the Zero-Emission Technology Inventory Tool, ZEB for short. And really, this tool, and it's available online, and if you're interested in seeing that and playing around with that yourself, reach out to us. We'd be glad to share the link. But it shows the market availability of vehicles that are available today through at least 2025. And it does it from the light duty through the heavy duty market in the United States and across the world. And this information, even gets you down to the spec level and the dealership level too, as needed, or OEM level, so that you can actually look at the specifications behind those vehicles. The infrastructure assessment, as I mentioned earlier, really to gain a complete understanding of the your facility, your electricity consumption, your energy needs should you go to all electric, and then to determine the best chargers and charger types to meet the operations and the power requirements. A level 2 charger, for example, was a low-level charger under 20 kilowatt hours. That would be great for an overnight trickle charge activity. Sometimes we need to recommend a level 3 should there only be a limited amount of dwell time or downtime to charge, or an opportunity to charge during a lunch or break time. Greenhouse gas emission savings. This is something we offer in what we call our level 2 or level 3 transition plans. Here we really provide the total detail in all of the data elements you need to make that decision and inform. Here's an example of a fleet of 5 vehicles. The total CO2 savings is 2.3 million. Carbon savings 421. And again, you can see the data's all right there and clean and simple. And we also turn it around so that it's a number you can reflect on. For example, looking at this represents 14,000 trees. The amount of carbon 14,000 trees would consume over 7 years. Just to kind of give that benefit of aha, something that most of us can understand. Here is a short example of another fleet where you're looking at their vehicles, their vehicle class, the energy use per mile for that classification of vehicle. And based on that daily mileage input that's provided on the intake form, we're able to calculate the kilowatt hours per day required. And as you can see here for this fleet in this example, there's 1,004 kilowatt hours per day required. And again, you got 16 vehicles, and we make it clear and concise as this. This is the type of output you'll see in the report. So you have the data right at your fingertips, and it's easy to read and easy to share with stakeholders. We're still in the development phase here, and this is where we work with your utility, and we understand what utility rate case you fall under. And with that, we're able to dial in on your total expected utility rate cost. And in this example here, the total energy cost for this fleet comes out about $25,000 per year, which seems incredible for most of us that are currently paying for gasoline and diesel. Overnight charging for this fleet, for example, was between what we called our off-peak time, and this was the off-peak time deemed by that utility, which is between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. And they were doing some level of opportunity charging, as you can see in that middle element with the green data, between 11 and 1, so like a lunch and break time period. Here we also have another way of presenting the same type of data. Again, you can see each of the vehicles across the 24 hours of operation, And where you see the data field populated in gray, that is the amount of power required during that time of charge. So looking at vehicle number 7 here, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m., they're charging across that 8 hours and pulling 5 kilowatts per hour. And with that, that means that vehicle in total needs 40 kilowatts per hour for their charging. They're not utilizing the opportunity charging in that green band. And this dials into a level 2 charger need. And just to give you a quick overview summary, and you can actually see the mapping of a day's use case. Again, this informs that charging strategy. And as we start to look at this and define what chargers are needed, we can populate this information into the total cost of ownership information. And it also feeds into the funding review, both elements of this and the utility piece. Our total cost of ownership tool really runs on a basic set of assumptions that we agree upon as we sit down with the fleet. We look at the current bus fuel, the replacement fuel, the vehicle type, typically the classification of the vehicle based on gross vehicle weight. We look at the current cost of gasoline, diesel, or the other fuel. It's usually the current average. Sometimes we use the AAA amount, but again, we like to dial it into the fleet because again, they might be paying a special rate for fuel. We then look at the expected, in turn, energy costs from the utility, and that's based on that rate case discussion. We look at the estimated bus life. This is a class 4 bus, so 7-year bus life. We look at the days of operation annually. So this bus here runs 5 days a week or 260 days a year. We look at the current cost for the gasoline equivalent vehicle. We see if there's any local mesh to offset that cost. We then look at the current quote or current quote for a bus that you're looking for in replacement, seeing if there's any local match or any incentive rate against that. If we have it available to us, sometimes that's not always the case. It depends on the fleet. We look at the maintenance costs. What are they currently paying baseline maintenance? And if that kind of data is not available, we can work and dial it in or use assumptions that are built into our tool. And again, we look at the efficiency. So for this class 4 shuttle, they use about 0.8 kilowatt hours per mile. For a gasoline class 4 shuttle is about 7 miles per gallon, the one used in this example. And so what this tool does is once we feed this in, and again, this is a CALSTART tool that we have available online again, and we'd be glad to showcase it with any of you as well. You know, from this, you can see that the output says the payback period from going from a gasoline vehicle to a battery electric vehicle is 1.4 years. We're also able to dial into the total savings per year, including the vehicle service price. So again, our purchase price, and in this case, it was $90,000. Total savings, not including the purchase price. So you're dialing in on fuel as well. And so it's about, $111,000. And again, this is a high level percentage in this case where we're going from a gasoline to battery electric class 4 vehicle. We are seeing a 90% fuel savings and a 19% maintenance savings. And again, having this data and output is going to be available to you in your report. I'm going to try to.
There is a question on this that's relevant to the total cost of ownership.
Yes.
For the maintenance costs, are you assuming that the transit agency has in-house maintenance, and how do you handle it if they do not have in-house maintenance?
Yep. So it depends on the fleet manager. A lot of times the work is being done offsite with a different entity, and they can kind of assume those costs because they can look at it from their financial states, like how much am I paying per year, and we're able to dial it in by mile for that vehicle based on the mileage on that vehicle and based on the cost per year for that vehicle if the data is available. If not, we can use the average assumption that's built into the model. And again, we'll work with the fleet and make sure that they're comfortable with those numbers.
Thank you.
Did that help? And then moving on to the third phase, which is the planning phase. Here you'll see this is an overview of what we would, how we would design a roadmap. This one's a little bit more pictorial because in this case we wanted to showcase what type of vehicles we wanted to recommend for this fleet. And so that if someone wasn't familiar with the Lightning F550 platform, this is what it would look like. This is the data behind it. And it's across all 5 years of implementation. So you read it top to bottom. So we look at the vehicles, we look at the charging infrastructure and the total cost by year. So if we look at the first year in this roadmap, we're recommending 2 vehicles. We're recommending 1 level 3 charger, 350 kilowatt. And the total cost there for this is about $500,000 to about $600,000. And then we walk that through each of the years through the plan. And for this example, you'll see that is a $10 million transition opportunity. Here, you'll see that there's no available funding opportunities or incentives baked in. So this is the pure cost. Here's another example. And again, the reason why I'm providing it, it's a 3-year example, but it also provides the funding that's available to them to offset those costs. And so, as you can see here, they have $85,000 available to them, which was able to offset the balance from 4.4 million down to 4.2 million almost. And then last but not least, pretty straightforward, we do provide that customer fleet report, a case study if optional, and that 1-page handout, which is an infographic. I totally love it. Here's an example of it. I can't speak enough about it. You know, we showcase the vehicles, we showcase the chargers, and in this case, you'll see there was a scenario 1 and scenario 2 because they wanted to look at, okay, if I were to do a mix of all level 2 or all of level 3 and some level 1, what would that look like? And so both scenarios are called out here. Here we showcase the total energy demand. Here it's daily and weekly. The electricity costs, savings, total lifetime savings, and again, that's based off the total cost of ownership. All of our greenhouse gas emissions savings, and then the total cost. And again, this was an example of scenario 1, scenario 2. So we just don't look at the picture in whole one way. We can tailor it to, well, what if we ran this other scenario? And then you can see those 2 scenarios run side by side. And again, this is just some more examples of the fleet transition plans that we have delivered. You know, for the fleet, it really provides you an overview of the whole process and has all the details and the background details of each of the pieces within this process. That 1-pager just gives you the high-level overview of everything that's it's easily readable, digestible, and it's something you can hang on your bulletin board at work or share with all your key stakeholders. Your plan really enables those key critical discussions because you have the data to support that discussion. The board of directors, your utilities, team members, and other stakeholders. It also helps guide funding opportunities and grant opportunities that you might want to go after in partnership with some of your key stakeholders like CALSTART and others. It also helps you inform your annual planning and really puts the plan, enables your ability to take the plan and move it into action. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. Should there be any additional questions? Because I know I went through this quite quickly and at very high level.
Maureen, there was one question on if there was a tool developed to find the best charger from the OEM perspective.
And I apologize, Jared, you're breaking up a little bit.
Oh.
Maureen, the question was
yeah.
about the interoperability of chargers, and clearly somebody says they've been having a kind of a less than reliable current manufacturer on the fleet charging infrastructure. Is there a tool to find out what is that best infrastructure or manufacturer, or do you have kind of a preferred set that CalSTART works with?
Yeah, so we run quite a few programs that are geared and centered around infrastructure, meaning that we're able to point out all the available infrastructures on the market. And again, these are tailored a lot of times for California. But what we do before we put this together this plan, is we really look at some of the market leaders on the vehicle side. And one of the decision points that we need to make in working in the fleet is, do they want to be tied in with a vendor that's a vehicle plus infrastructure, or do they want to buy the infrastructure separately? And we need to make sure that the vehicle and the infrastructure themselves will work together. Again, there's that interoperability question that is, and I hate to say it, but it can be quite confusing and kind of a daunting task if you don't have an OEM that allows for interoperability with anything but their own personal charger and subset. I might turn it over to Mike on that as well, because I know you've done a lot of work around, deploying both the vehicle and the chargers as well. What is your point on that one?
Yeah, I'll just add, Jared posted in the chat, but one of the things we're working on with FTA is requiring interoperability for chargers, so that, it gives you as the transit operator more flexibility. You're not tied into a specific charger, specific OEM. I think to answer the question in general is that, there's really no reason that you should be locked into a given provider. There are a lot of various options. Certainly we can look through that in the fleet transition plan, planning efforts. And you're also seeing a lot of agencies try out different options. It's not uncommon for agencies to use multiple different providers to kind of see what works for them. But ultimately, it's really what will work best for you, but really kind of exploring who's available to you, because again, you shouldn't be locked into a given individual. So if you're not happy with the provider that you have, that's something that there's technical assistance out there that we can look at that and provide other options for you. Because again, the point is here is to make you successful as an agency and not put up roadblocks. So the infrastructure shouldn't be a roadblock for you.
No, and we really try to dial that into the plan. We do not want to lock you in. Now, if you're adamant to, work with a specific vendor, we'll sit down and we'll have a discussion as to, the pros and cons of that, just so you're informed.
Thanks, Maureen and Mike. And I'll handle the next question came up was the cost to develop a plan. Jared's handling that within the chat for our member, Krishna up in New Jersey. I would also, here's Paige has a question. Can you describe the spare ratio that is typically used for the transition plan? This is a really important question because we've had a lot of small urban systems that are right on that threshold. Mm-hmm. And if they're not replacing their fleet with a 1-to-1, suddenly they get on the wrong side of this. CTAs have had discussions with FTA on that, but you guys probably, we discuss a lot of things with them. You probably do it in a little more strategic way.
Yeah, so if you're leveraging a funding opportunity, some of the funding opportunities do require, disposal, 1-for-1 replacement. And I would really, I think what we're trying to advocate for is kind of having that pilot period where if you're planning for a zero emission bus, you don't have to, turn around and, dispose of the current bus, that you have like this set time frame up to maybe a year that you can prove out the new technology and still have that backup option available, as you ease into the process. It's kind of like a pilot period. Is what we're really advocating for. I guess, Mike and Jared, from your point of view, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I think I'd also add too, that's one of the things that you really want to look at in the fleet transition plan is it a 1-to-1 ratio? And if it isn't, what does it look like for you? Obviously, the goal is to be a 1-to-1, but that may not be an option. So looking at, why is that not an option? Is it based on what the service is? Is it the current technology? What is the time frame for your transition? That's one of the things we're seeing too, is that a lot of agencies are looking at this for a long period of years in terms of 5-10 years, what have you. So having those conversations about what you want to do for your transition, what would you like to do, and what the technology is available for you. So it really is kind of working with the fleet to figure out what works best for you, because again, it may not be a one-to-one. So to Maureen's point, do we develop some type of pilot system where you can try out the technology to see how it works and decide what your path is? Or is it a time frame where we're looking at, just using examples, your range is such where battery electric is infeasible, but hydrogen is, but you may not have the infrastructure in place for it. So what is the time frame to get to that point? Again, I think that the key with these plans for anyone who's doing a fleet transition plan is it shouldn't be designed so that it's something that you just do immediately. It's a plan, it's a roadmap to get you there. It's not going to happen overnight. And the goal really, again, with that flexibility and that living nature of the document, is to provide you a path forward and adjusting as needed, again, to get to that point of success, whatever that may look like for a given agency.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Mike and Maureen, do you see a difference in terms of the spare ratios for 35 and 40-foot bus operators versus, say, someone who's doing more on-demand stuff and might have smaller vehicles in terms of that spare ratio?
I haven't seen a variability between the two, but I can definitely see the benefits of having it in some cases. And maybe it's because, when we consider a replacement transition plan, a little, versus expansion, when you're doing an expansion replacement plan, like, for lack of a better term, you still have that, original subset of vehicles available to you. That's where the element, that I think that's where the changes, are more visible and for us in working with the fleet.
Yeah, and just for the participants, we've tried to emphasize with FTA, because a lot of the spare ratio issues end up coming out in a triennial or a state management review as a finding, that's a place where they should be communicating to their reviewers to ease off as people are, going into these transitions. So Paige, thanks for that question. Maureen, you mentioned 65 transitions you've helped agencies through. I'm going to assume, and I think people maybe want to hear, like how often does the initial plan take someone through to the end? I mean, there's just so many variables, funding and its availability being the most obvious one, but also people adding service. There was, coming out of the pandemic, there's just a lot of upheaval in our space right now. How robust are the plans in terms of their ability to deal with change that for many, I think, participating, it seems almost inevitable? Yep.
So, once we get a plan in place, what really drives the forward momentum is getting those approvals needed from the board and the stakeholders to move forward. The next element is that supply chain. Just last year, it was the vehicles in the supply chain discussion. This year now, it's the infrastructure and the medium and high voltage switchgear. And, really what we try to dial in as we develop these plans as best as possible in kind of like the best scenario viewpoint with a realization of the current environment, is getting the best case is you get the vehicles and infrastructure at the same time. The second best case, or option B, would be let's get the infrastructure in place, ensure that it's working, and then the vehicles can quickly follow behind. I think the worst case we want to ever see a fleet be in, but it's still manageable, is getting their vehicles and not being able to charge, because the vehicles come first and then the infrastructure, they're waiting. And so they've gotten these, beautiful new vehicles with new technology, and they're unable to use them. But we're trying to also advocate for temporary solutions at the state level and at the federal level to really kind of fill that stopgap situation, because that's going to happen. And we want to make sure that when fleets are moving forward on their plan and do start to receive the vehicles and the infrastructure, that they can be up and running as quickly as possible. And regarding your time frame, was the time frame to complete the plan or the time to kind of go through all the steps and get everything in place in total?
I mean, I was thinking towards the completion, which I know is, you mentioned 3, 5, maybe even longer in terms of years. And I just know how much can change in a 5-year period for a smaller transit agency. You can it can, you know, profound change can happen just operationally. And they're going to need plans that can deal with that.
Yep. And so when we do sit down with them, we talk about, you know, is your ridership growing? Is your ridership growing? And if so, by how much? Are there other factors coming into place that we need to consider as we build out these plans? You know, and I think it's how quickly is the fleet and the board able to get approvals, you know, through the system procurement. You know, that could be a long lead time as well if you already don't have a federalized, you know, RFP from which to purchase the equipment off of or the vehicles off of, and you're going through the RFP process from pen and paper. You know, if you can dial in on, you know, identified partners, identified OEMs, or federalized RFP that you can purchase off of, that's going to speed up the process really quickly.
Agreed.
We've seen some small fleets turn around their plan in under a year. And when I say their plan, meaning they've achieved their year one portion of the plan. So we're guessing that the second year functionality or the success would also be within a year's time frame. And again, you know, kind of going into the interoperability question too, you know, we could go and put in all this infrastructure, but we need to make sure, because of all the unknowns beyond that 5-year point, 3-year point, that it's going to work. And so when we kind of pick the top 3 options, we make sure that there's the interoperability. They've been around and in existence for a long time. There might be some outliers that they're the only ones that can offer like a 19.2 kilowatt level 2, and that's where we want to be at. And there's only one vendor, so we kind of, you know, recommend that, but then also share the pros and cons of going with that vendor.
Yeah, that makes sense. Matthew had a question. He's got at his agency 4 chargers, 2 are down. Do you assist as people are onboarding technologies where there are issues like what he's dealing with?
Well, going to the planning side of the process, we always build in resiliency, understanding that there will be times when equipment does go down. So we usually plan for 10 to 20% resiliency. So for every, you know, 10 chargers, we ensure that there's 1 or 2 in backup. With level 2s, a lot of times we recommend 1-for-1 posts, meaning, you know, you have a single port on a level 2, but maybe a dual port on a level 3. And in that same vein too, having that 10 to 20% backup, because, you know, you have to wait for the service technician to come out and support you and get the support you need to get the equipment back up and running. And on another flip side, you know, the workforce development piece, which we haven't even talked about, we're really trying to work to develop regional workforce development programs, national workforce development programs. I'll let Jared and Mike elaborate that a little bit more, but, you know, having the capability and the ease of access to technicians and maintenance technicians that can support. It's unfortunate to hear 2 out of the 4 chargers are down. I'm hoping he only needs the 2. But again, these are things that we need to hear about too, so that we can help advocate for change and improvement as well.
Yeah, it's you know, for every CTA member that approaches us and says, I want to do this, they've almost always heard some horror stories from colleagues, and you know, smaller agencies are not, they're much more risk averse. That is their history. That's they come by infrastructure, whether it's their vehicle fleets or any other pieces. It's hard to come by, and when they get it, they expect to be able to use it, and it needs to work. And they can't, you know, and that's part of, I think, what we're hearing with this.
Yep. You know, with any new technology, there's always those kinks you got to work out in the beginning, and you kind of got to understand that there might be some of these issues that, you know, you unfortunately are faced with, but, you know, make sure that you have a good stakeholder partnership built out as you lean into this, your plan, and ensure that you have, you know, your DOT, your utility, your transition plan partner, any other key stakeholder that's going to give you the assistance. If you're picking up the vehicle and the OEM for both the vehicle and the charger, make sure you built out a really strong relationship. There's no saying that the person that you're building a relationship might change jobs in the meantime, but at least you have that, ease of access of getting a hold of the right person, and you're kind of at least more, you've mitigated the risk of not being able to get a hold of anyone when you need help.
Yeah, and I think what Matthew raises, about reliance on the OEM is we're going to deal with that, Matthew, and I hate here on webinar 1 to be referencing webinar 6, but we're going to focus that webinar 6 almost exclusively, at least in our plans, on workforce development. And I think that's critical too, to broadening the transitions across the transit space, is the ability to have your folks fix things and not always be relying on the OEM. And I know that's a big piece of what we've been working on. I'm on the board at the Transit Workforce Center. I know they're big on that. We need to build out the workforce development component in this, so we don't end up with what you're talking about, Mike, or Matthew, excuse me.
Yeah, and Scott, I just add too, I mean, I think, issues are always going to come up, and it really they're not unique to zero emissions. I mean, there's issues with diesel vehicles, CNG, what have you. I mean, that's just part of the nature of transit. I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of agencies have is that, well, I should accept some level of issues. And I say this as a former transit operator myself, I don't think you should. I think it's reasonable for you to expect your equipment to work. It's reasonable for you to expect that you're going to get reliable service from the vendors that you work with. It's reasonable for you to expect that the OEMs are going to support you in the way that they said they have. And if they're not, I mean, that's issues that need to be raised. I think one of the best things that transit agencies do is share knowledge between each other, share knowledge with groups like CTAA, get that knowledge out there. The best thing that we can do collectively is learn from each other. So if there are issues with certain OEMs or certain infrastructure manufacturers or what have you, we need to share that information so we can work collectively to solve it. Because again, you shouldn't just accept that things are going to go wrong. I mean, they are going to, but you should expect to get them fixed up. So I think one of the biggest things, that we get out of this, the fleet transition planning work too, is kind of, to Maureen's point, is kind of laying out the plan for resiliency as well. So that's something we need to consider. You need to consider, whoever is doing your plan, and basically putting you on a foot where you're going to be successful no matter what you choose, and you've kind of planned for, much like service changes. You don't know, Monday was a great service day, but Tuesday all kind of stuff went to heck. So agencies need to be flexible, but at the same time, it's not unreasonable to expect to get what you were promised from these vendors, for sure.
Before we get to Matthew's next question, I was going to ask you guys about local climate conditions. Do you build that into these plans? I'm in the north, I've got a lot of colder weather, I'm dealing with snow and ice. I'm in the south, it's hot a lot of the year. How do you take some of those conditions into account in these plans?
Well, if you go into like more of our level 3 transition plans, we are able to do what we use our route modeling, a route efficiency model, and we do use physics-based data. We look at topography, elevations, distance, the expected capacity on the vehicle, because that affects the weight of the vehicle, and we look at seasonality there too to kind of dial in on are these vehicles that we're looking at in replacement option going to achieve the operations that you're seeking, the range that you're seeking, and then we use that to help inform and guide to even improve on more what vehicles we want as that replacement plan.
And the last question we'll take is Matthew's about the electrical regulation development, and kind of do you see as we see a lot more fleets making these transitions now, and it's not just in the transit space. Do you see some emerging kind of regulation development around that?
So we here at CalSTART are involved in a lot of standards organizations. In particular, we're working There's several of us that are part of the NACS committee, which is the TESA North American Connector Standard. And we're working really closely with ISO, UL, and other standards organizations to ensure that the regulations and the standards that are in place, protect the end user, the fleet, the passenger, or, and the individual vehicle owners. And then I also see, building on that question, is there any protocol development for first responders to deal with fires? That's something that too we recognize needs some further attention. Across each OEM, there's not a standardized system layout. And so if you were to use some specialized equipment, like, unfortunately, I'd say it, but like say the jaws of life, like, well, where can you cut into a vehicle? Where's the, the high voltage shut off switch? I don't think all of that has been laid out, but again, that's a part of the standardization and regulations that have to happen so that any first responder, be it the police, the fire department, can show up to a vehicle, immediately know how to and where to shut off the high voltage lines, and then also how to put out a battery fire. Because right now you can use a blanket on a battery itself, but you need like a very large tarp or blanket to put out any event should it happen with a fire.
Well, and with so many small agencies that have very tight areas in which they're storing vehicles very close to each other, that's got to be an issue as well, in terms of you got to look at different ways to overnight these vehicles in safer ways, because we've all read about folks who have had fires that have kind of run down the line of a fleet of vehicles, unfortunately. Yeah,
and it's unfortunate that we've also seen that happen on the diesel or the gasoline vehicles too.
Yeah, it does, exactly.
Yeah, we were just working with the depot in northern Michigan in the UP Upper Peninsula, and they lost a whole fleet due to something that caused a fire in one vehicle, and it spread throughout the depot because they store them inside because of, again, snow and icy wintry conditions. So yeah, definitely things that we're considering. Very, very critical.
Well, thanks everyone for the questions, and we're going to try to include this amount of time in each of these. If you have questions in between or you want to ask directly, you can send those to me. I'll put my email address here, and I'll share them with the team and make sure they get answered. As we go through this, but why don't we keep moving as we want to be careful with people's time here. We're getting close to an hour.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to quickly just bring on board, think about over 100 years ago, we were actually transitioning from battery to internal combustion engine. And so we're just kind of going back in history. And I am just so pleased not to be 100 years in history working on this and being at where we're at today with the state of technology, the state of understanding, and everything that we have in learnings over the past 100 years with internal combustion engines and how to best service public transit in the public. So excellent. We're in a much better position for success.
Okay, well, I think we have one more slide, or a couple more.
Yep. 1 second, I gotta bring my.
Well, there we go. Our next webinar is on the 11th of October. That will also be at 2 p.m. Everybody who's signed up will get the link. You'll get some additional information. As Jared mentioned, the Transition to Zero podcast that kind of accompanies this initial discussion was released on the 19th of September. We encourage you to do that. We'll make sure that as we send out the link to this recording, we'll get you some of those links as resources. And we just wanted to thank the group for attending, and thanks for the great questions. And we're looking forward to seeing you in a couple weeks as we tackle intake forms, emission calculations, and why it all matters. So again, appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. There's the contact information for everyone who was the folks who were running most of this.
Appreciate it.